مرحبا. اليوم راح نحكي عن الفعل المعتل. Understanding weak verbs in Arabic. First, let's remember that we're actually really talking about our weak and strong roots in Arabic, but they have a lot of implications for the verbs, and so that's what we really want to focus on right now. But let's just do a quick reminder overview. First, we have roots in Arabic and we have patterns, and every word is composed of both. So we have a root, which is 3 letters, but you can't just pronounce 3 random letters in a row. There's no vowels, there's no anything. All you have is 3 random letters, and you can't say or something like that. That's just crazy. There's nothing to pronounce. On the other hand, we also have patterns, and a pattern is all the extra stuff that allows us to pronounce the word, and is usually associated with a meaning. We have talked about ways to represent patterns, and we have a way of representing a pattern that uses a root, fa'ala, but really patterns are more abstract than that. They're the vowels, the extra stuff. It's kind of like a mold that we stick our letters into. So only when the two come together do we get a word. So kabara is a root. There's no way to pronounce that. You can't say kabir. There's no vowels. There's just nothing there. It has to do with bigness and age and growth. There's the pattern fa'il, which has a ah sound on the first letter of the root, and a ya in between the second 2 letters of the root. And that usually has to do with adjectives, tawil, sagir. So if we stick the 2 together, we get kabir, meaning big or old. Now, the roots are composed generally of 3 letters, sometimes 4, very rarely 2, but just don't worry about that right now. But we can think of the letters that make up the roots as either being strong or weak. Now, strong are any of the consonants. Any consonant that's just a consonant and clearly a consonant is a strong sound. On the other hand, weak letters are really the waw and the ya. In Fusha, you can have a hamza there, but in colloquial Arabic, which is what we're really focusing on today, it's not used that much. So, as with many of our definitions of Arabic, a weak root is very easily defined as any root that has a weak letter in it. Now, this is a little tricky because you could have more than one weak letter, and words and roots that have that tend to be really weird. Most of those are absent from spoken Arabic, but there are a few that have stuck around that you just have to memorize things. So let's just really quickly review conjugating verbs in the past using our very favorite verb to study. أنا درست، أنت درست، أنتِ درستِ، هو درس، هي درست، نحن درسنا، أنتم درستوا، هم درسوا. Right? We've seen this before, we've dealt with this before, we've done this a million times. Similarly, in the present, أنا أدرس, you can do this with the ba or without the ba. I'm going to do it without the ba. Just pretend if I want to say بدي أدرس, بدك تدرس, etc., right, where we didn't have a ba. فأنا أدرس، تدرس، تدرسي، يدرس، تدرس، ندرس، تدرسوا، يدرسوا. Okay? This is basic Al-Arabiya 101, 111 kind of information. We're used to this. But we don't always think about it, and sometimes we forget the nitty-gritty details of this. So remember, a verb is really a stem, a bit of verbiness that we stick these affixes onto. Now, an affix refers to prefixes and suffixes. It's a general term. I'm sure you learned prefix and suffix in elementary or middle school, right, or high school. Just a prefix is like impossible added on to possible. A suffix is like truthiness. You take truth and you add iness to the very end of it. It's a suffix. The word affix refers to either of those. It's just a general term. So all verbs have a stem that we add affixes onto. In the past tense verbs, we only add suffixes to the stem. So if you study really traditional ways of learning Arabic, they call that the suffix tense, which is just we stick a suffix on it. Present tense verbs, we add mostly prefixes and a few suffixes as well. So when we think about the conjugations, we're really talking about a stem plus these suffixes. So daras, daras t, daras ti, daras na, daras tu, daras, daraset. One really good way to remember the hia conjugation is hia daraset. It's to think of the word bachelorette. That et thing at the end is a lot like the ending on daraset. But notice the stem on the right side of the screen here is daras, right? We have two fatha sounds. Now when we go to the present, again, this is really basic stuff. We say edrus, tedrus, tedrusi, yedrus, tedrus, nedrus, tedrusu, yedrusu. And here the stem is drus, D-R-U-S. Notice that's different, right? That's a little bit weird if you think about it. So in the past tense, we have daras. In the present tense, we have yedrus. Those are different stems. And in Form 1, especially, we just have to memorize for every single verb what is the past tense stem and the present tense stem. Now, if you just try to memorize stems, that's all good and well, but it's not that useful. So we often present them to you in a vocab list as looking like the past tense hua form and the present tense hua form. So daras yedrus really tells you all the information you need to know about those stems. Now, we've been working on the auzen, and the cool thing about the auzen 2 to 10 is it's not per verb. It's not every single root we have to learn and memorize what exactly the past or present stem are. We can just, by knowing what form it is, know the stem. So our wasn't of the week sheet has something like this. فَعَلَ يُفَاعِلُ تَفْعِيل for wasn't اتنين. Well, that's all cool, but what does that mean? That means that we know how to pronounce the verb forms for Form 2 verbs for any verb. We don't have to memorize it. For Form 1, you never know what those vowels are going to be exactly in the middle of the word. So, darasa yedrus, shariba yeshrab, right? In that one, there's an I in the past tense and an A in the present tense. Darasa yedrus has an A in the past tense and U in the present tense. It's a mess. But for Forms 2 through 10, we don't need that stuff. And again, this should be mostly review. But if we want to talk about teaching I taught, we just look at this at that chart and we see that the past tense hua form is fa'ala, and we can just sub in the letters da, ra, and sa for that. And you'll notice I use 3s for the ayn just because I think it's easy to see that way and we don't have a letter for it in English. But then it's ana darrast, inta darrast, inti darrasti, huwa darras, hiya darraset, نحن درسنا, انتو درستو, هم درسوا. But notice, we can just stick it right in there. In the present tense, I don't want you to get too caught up in this. In Fusha, the sound after the prefixes changes, but we have uderris, right? We see that I sound in the last syllable. That's really important. Tuderris, tuderrisi, uderris, tuderris, nuderris, tuderrisu, uderris. But that uderris is a different stem than we had in the past tense. And by memorizing our whole chart of auzen, if you give me a new verb and I know what wasn't it is, I can already conjugate it in the past and present without any real effort. Now, weak roots, on the other hand, do have weird effects on the stems. Verbs made from weak roots tend to have multiple stems in each tense, usually 2 stems in the past tense. Roots which have similar weaknesses have similar patterns of verbs. So, if you have multiple roots that all have the middle letter as a vowel, they tend to act exactly the same way as each other. So it's not really that we have irregular verbs in Arabic. We really have patterns of irregularity. So you don't need a reference grammar 500 verbs in Arabic where each page is a different verb. What you really need is a reference that has the different patterns of verbs in Arabic. And those are really short. I have one that's like 40 pages long and it's pretty comprehensive because all similar weak verbs act more or less the same way. And so once you know one good example of one kind, you know all the similar kinds of verbs. And think about this mathematically. If a root has 3 consonants, we have 3 places where it can be weak. The first letter could be weak, the second letter could be weak, the third letter could be weak. More than one letter can be weak, but that's rare. The weak letters are mostly wow and yeah. So really we're talking about the first letter could be a wow or yeah, the second letter could be wow or yeah, the third letter could be a wow or yeah. And so you'll have classes of verbs where all the verbs that have the second letter is yeah are almost all the same, where the third letter is yeah are mostly the same, the third letter is wow, which is pretty rare, are all the same. Now, the most common examples of this, right? There's 2 ways to think of common, right? You could count all the verbs in the dictionary and add them up and see all the roots in the dictionary, sorry, and add them up and see which ones are most likely to exist. Are you most likely to have a wow at the first letter or a second letter or third letter, etc. But you can also think of terms of the verbs you're most likely to hear. And in the verbs we're most likely to hear, the most common weak roots are having a wow or yeah as the second consonant, and having a final yeah as the final consonant. They could have a final wow, but that's pretty rare. It's not that common. There are a few high-frequency verbs that have that, but more or less, you're going to find a lot more yes as the final consonant. Now, we already know a bunch of verbs like this. So verbs that have a middle wow in the root and the second letter is a wow, we know a ton of these. Yaruh, yashuf, yaqul, yakun, yazur. Those with the middle yeah are less common, but there are some really important ones, like yaish, yasir, yafi, to wake up, right? We learned fat, yafi, we had to memorize that, but that one acts the same way as most other verbs that have little yeah in the middle. And then the final yeah verbs are very common and very important. So we learned yati this semester, to give, yashteri, to buy, yahki, to speak. These are all really important verbs, obviously, and they have this weird final yeah thing. So let's go into the details of what makes these common weak roots kind of confusing. Let's start with the middle wow in the past tense. Now we know a bunch of these verbs, but the one that we really nailed down in chapter 4 of El Kitab is kunt. And this one's a really important verb. We use it for a lot of things, but notice that it has 2 stems. So in the first and second person, ana kunt, anta kunt, inti kunti, nahna kunna. Notice how if you write it in Arabic, it's kind of confusing because that shadda collapses the letter, but it's really kun and na, entu kuntu. And so you have the stem kun. In the third person, you have a totally different stem. You have can, canat, canu. It all follows the same rules, except you have a different stem in the first and second person than you have in the third person. And that's what really makes these different from sound roots. And notice too the different vowels are really important. So we have kun in the first and second, and we have can in the third person. Now, notice that we can extend this to other verbs. Other verbs operate the exact same way. So we've known this verb rah, to go. Again, just like kunt, ana ruht, anta kunt, anta ruht, inti kunt, inti kunti, inti ruhti, nahna kunna, ihna ruhna, intu kuntu, intu ruhtu. It acts exactly the same way, right? We just have a very similar stem where we have this dhamma in the middle, and then in the third person it's very similar. Can, rah, kanat, rahat, kanu, rahu, right? You can extend this information. I know can, I can conjugate rah, I can conjugate shaf, I can conjugate al, to say. All of these things are extensible and extendable to a whole family of similar verbs. Notice, by the way, that these are actually really easy in the present. There's only one stem. أروح تروح تروحي يروح تروح نروح تروحوا يروحوا. It's really easy. We only have one stem, but notice that in the present they have a wow in the middle, and this tells us that this is a middle wow verb, not a middle yeah verb, because in the present we have this clear wow. It's really easy and really clear, and we know that that's very clearly part of the root. Now, how do we know the stems? If we're come across a new verb that we've never seen before, how do we know what the stem is? Well, for a Form 1 verb, if you're reading the textbook or whatever, it's going to give it to you. And it says Alex will give it to you in a Quizlet, for example, or in a vocab list. So this is a vocab item from Al Kitab, and it's the verb to stay up late. And if we look at the Fusha, it's Sahira Yashar. In the Shami, it's Sihr Yashar. The most important is that middle vowel, though. So what does this tell us? This tells us that the past tense stem is Sahr, or Sihr. So that if we want to say they stayed up late, we just add our suffix onto it, and we say Sihru. Notice the kasra in that middle. We know that the present tense has a fatha on the middle letter, so we would say yes haru, right? We say Sihru, yes haru. But we just add our conjugations onto this. Pretty easy, we've been doing this for a while. The problem is, with weak verbs, we have to know what exactly is the first and second person stem. Eventually we can guess it, but in the textbook, because it's being nice to us, it'll usually give us the ena form, and it usually gives that to us in parentheses. Now this isn't just giving us the form for how to say ena, I do something. It's giving us the form, the stem, for the whole first and second person. So we know that for this verb to sleep, to go to sleep, we know that the third person stem is nam. That's the first entry, that's the first thing that they give us, right? Because they always give us the past tense hua form. So if we want to say they slept, you say namu. But we also know that the past first and second stem is nim, because they told us that to say I go to sleep is nimt. But that means we can extend that to say you all slept is nimtu, like you're asking somebody when they woke up in the morning, nimtu imnih, right? We can extrapolate very quickly and just add our suffixes on. We know that the present tense is nam, so they are staying up late is yanamu. Note that nam is a really weird verb, and I'm not really talking about it in today's lesson, but this is kind of a weirdly unusual verb, but that entry gives us all the information we need to know to conjugate it, right? We can conjugate the past and the present with just those three pieces of information: the past tense hua, the past tense ena, and the present tense hua form. That's all the information we need. That's the idea, is to give us all the information we need. Now notice we had the middle wow verbs, but there's also middle yeah verbs. So ena aish, this present tense has a yeah in the middle, and it tells us this acts a little bit differently than the middle wow verbs that we've seen, aruh, ashuf, akun, right? We're used to the wow in the middle, but this has a yeah in the middle. But just like the ones that had the wow in the middle, there's only one stem in the present tense, no weird funny business. Ana aish, anta taish, inti taishi, huwa yaish, hiya taish, nahnu naish, intu taishu, hum yaishu. Very basic, acts like most any other verb. But in the past tense, again, we have two stems. But this, and in the third person, is very similar to the rah shaf. It's ash, ashet, ashu, right? Here again, we have that nice aleph in the past tense, yeah in the present tense, but it's pretty similar to aleph in the past tense, wow in the present tense. But in the first and second, it's a little bit different in that instead of an sound, it's an sound. Ana ishtu, inta isht, inti ishti, nahna ishna, intu ishtu, wa huwa ash, hiya ashet, wa hum ashu. Again, we have two stems. So again, just summarizing the middle weak verbs, we have middle wow and middle yeah. We have either wow or yeah in the present tense, and in the past tense, the third person stem always has an aleph for both these kinds. Any of these middle weak ones has this aleph in the past. But If in the present tense it's a wow, in the past it has a dhamma in the middle. Ruht, kunt, ult. But think about it, that makes sense because dhamma is just the short version of a wow. If we squish a wow to make it shorter, it turns into a dhamma. It even looks like a dhamma when you write it. If it's a yeah in the present tense, then the past first person has a kasra in the middle. Esht, sirt, fit. Kasra, of course, is just a short version of yeah, right? I, same deal. It's a pretty easy pattern to remember. In the middle weeks, we've done so many with them, this shouldn't be too difficult for us at this point. Now, the final yeah verbs are a kind of new friend that we've just met. These usually have an aleph maksura in the past tense. And notice it's not a standing aleph, it's an aleph maksura that looks exactly like a yeah. And this is usually a hint to us that this yeah is going to turn into something weird. This aleph is going to turn into a yeah in some way, shape, or form. And in these verbs, it turns into a yeah in the present. Now, a lot of very common verbs follow this pattern. The nice thing about this is this pattern is pretty stable across auzen because most of the auzen play with or change stuff at the beginning of the verb stem, not so much at the end. So once you've learned this once, it's pretty easy. And actually the verb ishtera, yishteri, which we've focused on a lot, is actually a form 8 verb. But don't let that mess with you. Don't worry about that. It's going to act the same way as ata yati, khalla yakhalli, haka yahki, to speak. All of these things are going to act very similarly. And that's one of the nice things about this pattern, is this pattern is very extensible and usable for other verbs. So in the past tense, again, we have 2 stems, but this time what's weird is that this yeah thing turns into the sound a. So, أنا اشتريت, أنت اشتريت, أنت اشتريتي, نحن اشترينا, وأنتوا اشتريتوا. In the third person, the stem is more like ishtar. So we have هو اشترى, هي اشترت, وهم اشتروا. Now the one really weird thing here, and you see I put a little box around it, is we have an ah sound in the hua form here. And that is really important because that is unusual. That is kind of an exception to our normal conjugation. You just have to memorize that this final form, this final yeah kind of form, has an ah sound at the end. But because we usually give you the third person hua form, you'll see it a lot, hua ishtera, right? The hard part though is remembering that hiya ishteret. So you just have to try to remember what the rule is on that. The other thing that's worth noting is ishteru, right? We don't have any alephy thing before that oo sound. And again, you just have to put like little flags in your head for these slight differences. This one's a little bit more tricky than the middle week. In the present, it's pretty straightforward, except remember in the present we have suffixes, and our weird letter is at the end of the word because it's the last letter in the root. So that's going to make it a little bit weirder. And you can think of this 2 ways. I like to think of it as there being one stem, but being a couple rules. So, أنا اشتري, أنت تشتري, أنتِ تشتري, هو يشتري, هي تشتري, نحن نشتري, أنتوا تشتروا, وهم يشتروا. But notice whenever we have the suffixes added, different things happen. For inti, the yeah merges with the other yeah, and you can't tell that there's 2 yeahs there. Teshteri, right? Tedrusi, we would have an e there, but like we already have an e, so it's a moot point. The weird thing is with entu and hom, where we add the yeah, and then we have the oo sound after it. So logically, you would think we'd say tishteriu or something like that, but we don't. It's almost like the wow eats up the yeah. And that's just what happens in Shami Arabic and in Fusha for these verbs. But it would be pretty logical to have tishteriu or yeshteriu, and some dialects do that. So in fact, Moroccan Arabic does that. They say yeshteriu. They have a yeah in there, they keep it in there because it makes sense, because it fits better with the rest of everything. It's a little more logical. The Shami version isn't as logical, but we just have to memorize it. We just have to memorize the general rule is if you have that yeah at the end, the wow eats it. And you just have to memorize that and be used to it. And the best way to do this is to just know a verb really. So, just to summarize, why is this information so important? It's important because if we encounter a brand new verb that looks like a verb we already know, we can conjugate it pretty confidently, right? So it means that if somebody hands us a new verb, whether we're speaking to them and they use it in speech and we're like, oh yeah, I just learned this verb by context, I want to use it, you can be pretty sure um, what you're doing with that verb. And the likelihood of making a massive mistake is not very high. So if we see the verb in a story or something and he says zar ochto or yazur ochto, and we figure out that it means to visit or something, we can guess, just based on the past and present tenses that we've seen around, we can guess that we would want to say zurt. Because we have a sense that we're probably going to have a dum on it because it has that wow in the present tense. It falls into the middle wow pattern, and it's going to be just like ruh, shuft, all those other ones. Zurt, we just add it to that bucket of, oh, all of these are middle weak with a wow in the middle. And notice, another reason why it's important to notice is that Hans Ver is designed for people who know Arabic really well, and most dictionaries are. They're not nice. They're not nice to us. And they're not going to be nice to us because they expect you to know this stuff. Because the way you used to learn Arabic is I would hand you a bunch of conjugation charts and you would do a bunch of conjugation and then you would get a dictionary and then you'd read a bunch of stuff and you'd have to do it like that, which is not a good way to learn languages, but that's what people who wrote these dictionaries 50 years ago expect. So if you look on the right side of the screen, at the top you see the entry for kan yakun. Now that kawana in the parentheses, that's just telling us what the root is. It's not telling us anything about the conjugation. Next, you see the kana, right? So we know what the past tense hua form is. But what is the present tense form? Well, that little u that's right next to it just tells us that it's an u. And we're supposed to know, well, this looks like a weak verb. It has a wow in the middle, so that it's going to be yakun, right? That's not very nice. It doesn't even tell us what the ena form is. It's evil and mean. It is not like a textbook. But we're expected to know this stuff. Notice that for weirder verbs, I told you that the verb nam, to sleep, was a little weird. Look on the right side again. They're actually nice there. They tell you that the ena form is nimtu. And they tell you that the present tense form, there's a little a after that. That is supposed to tell you that the hua form in the present tense is yanam. Not super nice, but a little bit nicer. But the other reason this is important is because it's important to start seeing patterns and understanding how to generalize. All right? So we're going to see a lot of different kinds of verbs. Remember, okay, we only really have 3 places where the verb can be weak, and I told you it's rare for there to be weaknesses in all 3 places. So you really have about 3, well, okay, so you have 3 places, 2 different letters really. So really you've got 6 types of verbs if you wanted to be a little in Shami Arabic, right? You could have wow at the beginning, yeah at the beginning, wow in the middle, yeah in the middle, wow at the end, yeah at the end, right? Okay, that's all fine and good. Doesn't seem like that's that much work. Don't be scared by this, but we also have 10 auzen. So if you add the interaction between 10 auzen and 6 different possibilities, you end up, right, with like 60 different possibilities. But reality is, you don't need to memorize all that stuff, but you should start cultivating an awareness of patterns of how these things work. So when you learn a new verb that has a weak letter in it, think, well, where is it weak? Do I ever see any other weak things? What are the sort of rules I can build up in my head, right? I can't always tell you the rule. And sometimes the rules I tell you are things that I made up for myself when I was learning. And sometimes you might have a better way to explain it to yourself. So start to see those patterns. And when we learn new words, we are going to be given conjugation charts and stuff like that to help us. We're going to hear it a lot of times. But you need to be the one who comes up with your explanation for, oh, well, this disappears because it gets eaten by the wow. Or no, it's a different stem. Whatever is your story for explaining the things that you're learning, you need to start cultivating that and building up these patterns in your own mind in a way that makes sense to you. Because what makes sense to you is not always what makes sense to me or to anyone else. So what action items should you have? Well, every time you meet a new pattern, Usually I'm going to give you a verb conjugation chart for that pattern if I think it's important. And you should get to know one verb really, really well. It should be your go-to verb that you love and cherish and is your example. And it should be a real verb. It shouldn't be a fa'ala thing. It should be a real, honest-to-goodness verb that you're going to hear people use, so that every time you hear it, it gets grained into your brain more. For middle wow, we started with kana in El Kitab 4. A lot of you guys know that one really, really well, and that's a good one to start with. I don't love that verb because the present tense is kind of not used that much. If you want to use rah or shaf instead, go with that. Just make it your verb and own it. For final yeah, I think ishtera, yashteri works really well because we're going to use it a lot. It's a super useful verb to have. It's not abstract, it's to buy something. So consider that one. There's no weird monkey business going on with it. When you do see new verbs, think about that. Is this similar to a verb I've heard before? And another thing you can do that I do when I try to find songs for you guys is try looking for songs on YouTube that use that verb if you want to hear it used a lot. Or you can go to lyricstranslate.com and do a search in Arabic for your verb. Usually the ena forms or enta forms are what you're going to be looking for. The song's always about me and you. But maybe you can find songs that way and listen to them and hear them pronounced in a way that's helpful for you. But again, try to find exemplary verbs and own them. And the more common the verb is, the more likely you are to hear it enough times it gets really reinforced and becomes really natural and really automatic. Wa shukran.